Okay, welcome back. Part 2 of the evolution lecture. I apologize, it really did go long. I saw that I spent about 5 or 6 minutes on that first slide. That's all right. It was good stuff. Gave a little history. And while I'm talking, I'm sure you have time to write down some of these slides and the points that they make. Anyway, picking up here, this is where we left off, and we talked about ways in which natural selection can occur. Let's say in the black-bodied mice, the temperature, they're adapted to absorbing the warmth that is there, whereas these would not be, and therefore in a cold environment, we would have this directional selection, where those who are able to absorb more warmth would have a better chance of surviving. And we went through those scenarios, which I will not replicate right here, but that's near where we left off. So where I'm going to now are the last 4 kind of fingers of evolution, migration. And the question here is, what can throw off the allele frequencies? Generally, in a large population where everything's going fine and there's random mating, gene alleles and frequencies should stay the same. Say for allele A or allele B on a chromosome, the gene on a chromosome. Migration is one way that can be violated. It happens by way, that's the geographical movement of organisms, like the flight of birds over winter down south, or any animal that migrates to another area as the weather changes. These can cause deviations from the Hardy-Weinberg expectations, and so they provide new material for adaptation and evolution. So by changing the gene pools of different populations, you have upset the assumptions of Hardy-Weinberg. Through migration, then, new alleles can be introduced or taken away from a population, or at least even the frequencies of alleles and the genotypes can be altered, going more towards another. So if you have a population, sparrows at the top of a mountain tend to stay at the top. They're better adapted to higher altitude than the sparrows that hover and stay around the low-lying trees at the base of a mountain. And there's a little bit of a range where they might overlap. But if in the winter all those at the top migrate down, there'll be overlap in those two populations, and a few of those sparrows from the mountain tops might mate with those from the bottom, in which case they've introduced new alleles into that population at the base of the mountain. Those sparrows now have some of the genes from the mountaintop sparrows. But there's never really a season where it's too warm, or I'll call it the base mountain sparrows would go up to the top. So you have maybe a decrease in frequency in the mountaintop sparrows as opposed to the base of the mountain. The sparrows would change. The allele frequencies would be altered because new genes keep coming in every season from the mountaintop sparrows down into the base of the mountain, the base mountain sparrows. Anyway, so migration, I think it's somewhat self-explanatory. So genotypes and frequencies can be thrown off there. Genetic drift. This is kind of random. This one's probably the toughest one to explain. We can only go over a few scenarios, but all populations are finite. Some are small and some are very large, like the wildebeest here, but they're still finite. And there are just random changes. Can't explain why. And there might be a reason. It's just we cannot observe it. We have no idea why a particular wildebeest might mate with another wildebeest. In a herd or individually. It could just be random mutation that changes the genotypic frequency, and then that mutation accumulates over time. That's what we call genetic drift. This is only explained by observation. This is just something when we've looked at a population at a certain point in time, let's say 1990, 95, 2000, 2005, 2010, 2015, and we see that over the last 30 years, that more and more of a particular allele is coming up more often and another is not. We don't know why. It's just drifting in a particular direction. Things might have, we would look at the environment, we would look at the fitness, We'd look at the predators to see if the predators are driving that adaptation. Only wildebeest that run faster. I don't know. You have to use your imagination studying genetic drift. The smaller the population, though, the greater the effect is of that genetic drift on the gene pool. So most populations are limited, and many can be very small. In those small populations, dramatic changes in allele frequencies occur simply by chance. We just don't know the mechanism. So we just call it genetic drift. It's just a phenomena we see in particular populations. All right, genetic drift and allele fixation. So just as we can see that some alleles might decrease or disappear, we also have where an allele can be fixed in a population. So genetic drift can cause fixation of an allele, meaning every individual is homozygous for that trait, for the allele. Genetic drift is random. Fixation occurs entirely by chance. Harmful, neutral, or beneficial alleles can become fixed in a population. Let's imagine for this top scenario here, a small population of canaries on an island. And they only have two alleles, A and allele B. Well, here we're using humans, but canaries are nicer. Then imagine by chance a tree fell on a random set of those individuals. It was a small population to begin with, right? And those survivors happen to be homozygous for A. Well, obviously, only the survivors are going to be able to reproduce. So the B allele will no longer be present in future generations, right? And that didn't have to be a tree. It could have been a storm that wiped out a particular part of the population, hurricane. In this case, then the A allele is said to be fixed in the population. And we do see that in humans. There are some genes that are fixed in our population. No human varies from those. So in large populations, though, genetic drift is more likely to alter the frequency, but not completely knock it out, such as this case here. All right. Non-random mating. So Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium assumes random mating. So large population, anybody is free game, and this just doesn't happen typically. Non-random mating will lead to altered genotypic frequencies in a population. As long as there's preference, there's going to be choice. The allele or genes in that population are going to be driven one direction. And this is kind of what we mean almost by fitness, right? Non-random mating can be assortive, like mates with like, and disassortive, like mates with unlike. These will cause deviations in gene frequencies. So, in other words, individuals with similar phenotypes are going to have similar genotypes because it's the genes that dictate their physical appearance or behaviors. So some organisms in the wild are more likely to mate with each other than at random. They're looking for something that looks like them, acts like them, resembles them. Human populations are among those that exhibit assortive mating for a great number of features, genetic and non-genetic. But look at height. Tall women are more likely to mate with a tall man, and short women are more likely to mate with short men. That's just the way it goes. And this kind of random mating this kind of non-random mating violates assumptions of Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. So that population will not be in equilibrium because the genes keep changing, because tall prefers tall, short prefers short, and you tend to see this. There's always exceptions in the human race, but it'll create an excess of homozygotes for, say, height. In disassortive mating, like mates with unlike. So that is individuals with dissimilar phenotypes and dissimilar genotypes, therefore, are more likely to mate with each other than at random. So this kind of non-random mating violates assumptions as well by creating excessive heterozygotes. That is, most individuals are always going to have heterozygote condition. One allele for each the dominant and the recessive, because they like those differences. All right, so in summary, Darwin's insights offered an explanation of how inherited variation arises in nature, possibly by selection. Mendel provided the model of particulate inheritance. Those are homozygous and heterozygous. Probabilistic models developed by Hardy and Weinberg helped to merge and fill out these. Evolution occurs when populations deviate from the gene frequencies. So this evolution occurs when the populations deviate. All the things that we just went through are the things that cause them to deviate. Therefore, most populations are under some form of evolution. Now, and these are the reasons: mutation, genetic drift, migration, selection, natural selection or sexual selection, and non-random mating. To be clear on all this, as I finish up, the evolution we're talking about, we're using very broadly. We're talking about microevolution, not macroevolution. Microevolution occurs in bacteria becoming resistant to antibiotics, and so on and so forth, as you've seen in other materials. Okay, well, have a good and godly day.